By introducing our panelists. Tricia and Meredith are here to talk about what is a pretty large topic size. And we certainly will not cover it all in an hour. And as I usually say on panels, just keep in mind that you're hearing these two individuals' experiences, advice, opinions. You may have a different opinion. You may have had different experiences. We hope that along the way you share those with us. And the chat box is there for you to comment, and then we will also have, and ask questions, of course, and then we'll also have some time at the end to do a Q&A as well. So, Meredith, do you want to introduce yourself, say current job, and then what your first job was?
Sure. Meredith McCanse. I'm also in the Denver office. I don't know if I said that. My very first job was as a dancer. I grew up studying ballet very intensely, and I danced with the Westport Ballet Theater Company, and was really proud of that work. And they had a company, and once you joined the company, they paid you for performances, and that was my very first job. And what I do now, I work at Red Lion Hotels Corporation. I am a CPA, and I work in the in-house accounting department.
Perfect. Trish, welcome. First job, current job.
I'm Trish Downing, and my current job is as a motivational speaker and author, although I think I'm redefining that a little bit, considering we are not going to have in-person events for a while, so I'm not sure how that's going to look. And my first, I guess, big kid job out of college was working for Creme News Channel 2 in Spokane, Washington as a broadcast technician during the newscasts. So I ran the cameras, ran the teleprompter, audio, character generator, et cetera, for $6.50 an hour.
I didn't know that, Trish. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to jump right in with our first question. So as I mentioned, diversity and inclusion is an enormous topic, and we will talk about some specific do's and don'ts today. But it's certainly not a topic we could cover in an hour. So before we get into the details, I'm going to ask Meredith and Trish to share just the general high-level framework that they use to approach this topic. Meredith, you go ahead and get us started.
Yep. Oops. Am I unmuted? Yes. Okay. I'm going to share my screen because I find it, I'm a pretty visual person, and I find it helpful for myself around this topic to kind of keep some visuals in mind while I do it. So hopefully that worked. Can you see my screen? Mm-hmm. Okay. These are drawings. I drew this myself. So I have two drawings, and I think of these as being sort of opposite ends of a spectrum of a journey of a space or a business or a team, and their process with making their space, creating a culture of belonging, and inclusion. And so this is on sort of, I would say, the beginning end of the spectrum. You know, sometimes workplaces will hire people and they will check the box and be like, great, we've got a diverse workforce, our work here is done, nailed it. And then they walk away and they don't do anything else to foster a sense of belonging. And it's pretty simplistic. It's black and white. I think of the structure as being kind of like a marble with rigid walls. It's not flexible. It doesn't reflect on how it can adapt to welcome people, but just expects people who are joining the space to adapt themselves to fit the space. On the other end of that spectrum, On the other end of that spectrum, I think of sort of an amoeba shape, and I think of this as an organism that is pliable and flexible and dynamic, and it can change its shape to create space to foster belonging and to hold space to foster belonging. And rather than approaching it as we expect people who join us to adapt to our space, it takes on the responsibility of we are going to adapt our space to welcome the full range of human experiences that join us. So I think it's helpful to think about this with a specific example. And I have one that I'm currently living right now in my workspace, and I'm hoping some folks here might relate to it. Currently where I work, every single meeting starts with sports talk. And when I say sports talk, I mean football talk. And it's always 3 or 4 men, and they talk about football and joke with each other, and they it's always the same 3 or 4 men, and there will often be 5, 7, 10 other people in the room that just don't participate, have nothing to say, roll their eyes and sort of wait for it to end. And then the meeting continues, and those same 3 or 4 people who dominated the space at the beginning dominate the talking time through the meeting, and there's no opportunity created to invite more engagement from other participants. And that is an example of, well, you're welcome to talk football with us. No one's stopping you. But not taking some time to think about how can we create opportunities for other conversation to arise. I feel like the other end of that might be, and I haven't done this at my workspace, and I'm sort of thinking about ways to do it right now, but I feel like we could put in place some structure at the beginning of a meeting and have a structured icebreaker and alternate the topics that we talk about, or draw a topic out of a hat, or everybody, different people on different days get to choose what we talk about. And I'm sure that football and sports will find its way into that conversation, but it will also create some structure and space for other conversation to happen. And my theory is that if we can do that at the beginning when we're warming up for the meeting, it will also lead to more participation and more of a sense of safety for people to speak up if they have things to say in the meeting. So that's a tiny example, but I find it helpful for myself when I think about diversity and inclusion to kind of come back to a really simple, clear example if I ever find myself getting a little bit overwhelmed or kind of ungrounded with it. So those are my thoughts, and I will stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Meredith. I like the idea of being somewhere on that spectrum. Trish, what about you? How do you think about this topic?
You mean for me, my diverse elements, I guess, or many of them are really easy to see. You know, I'm in a wheelchair, so when I come into a room, it's automatically evident that I have some difference. And, you know, I think people, well, I know people will make sudden decisions about who I am, what I'm capable of, what my background is, you know, all of these things without ever taking the opportunity to get to know me or to ask any questions. And so I find that, you know, when it comes to the topic of diversity and inclusion, it is very much like Meredith said, it's, you know, we've checked the box. So we've got the girl in the wheelchair over in the corner. We don't know what to do with her, but she's here. So, you know, we're done doing what we need to do. And, you know, we assume that she can do X, Y, and Z and that she can't do A, B, and C. And, you know, then there's never any, you know, sort of like, hey, what can you do? What do you like to do? How can we help you do something that you want to learn to do? Or, you know, how can we help you do something that you know how to do, but, you know, the environment isn't conducive to that. So, you know, it's nice when people will stop and take the time and ask a question and say, you know, how can I help you? Or is this something that you can do? And then in turn, take the moment to listen to what I have to say, because a lot of times what happens is people ask the question, but they don't actually want to hear the answer because they've already made the answer up in their mind. So if they say, you know, can I help you do this? And you say no, and then they do it anyway, you know, that has pretty much, you know, shown that they don't really pay attention or put any weight on what you have to say or what you know, what your abilities are in the workplace or in any other place. So I think that this is a really important conversation because that diversity and that inclusion, you know, they mean different things. I mean, to me, diversity means having, you know, a group of varied individuals from different backgrounds and different walks of life. Including them is, you know, bringing them into the fold a little bit, but belonging is a feeling, and it's a feeling that when you don't have it, you can't give your best, and you don't feel good about yourself and about what you're doing, and it's very demotivating. And I've given a lot of thought to this just in the past, you know, couple of years, doing some writings, you know, just on my own about identity and how I feel about who I am. And one of the things that I go back to is my college experience when I went from Denver. I'm from Denver, and I went to the University of Vermont because I wanted to get as far away from home as possible. And this was, 10, 15 years before my accident, something like that. And I went to a school that was basically all white. And I'm biracial, I'm mixed Black and white. And I wasn't thinking about it because I was adopted by an all white family. So for all intents and purposes, I was raised white. I get to Vermont, and for some reason, I just never really felt like I fully belonged. I mean, I was able to make friends. I was able to do well. Well, no, I didn't do well in school. That's why I left there. I made friends and I had fun. That's what I did do. But I didn't ever realize that weird, like, kind of niggling feeling that I had in the back of my head was, that I came to a school that had, basically no African-American population. I looked different than the other students. I was a diver. So when I was on the, diving team and coming out of the swimming pool, my curls would go boing, and, I just never really felt like this is the place where people are going to look at me and see what they see when they look at somebody else. And so I just think that belonging, like looking back on that, I just didn't feel like 100% like I belonged. And that makes a difference. And it's hard to know that difference if you've never experienced it, but it's there. And I think that's why it's important to be having these kinds of conversations.
Thank you, Trish and Meredith, for setting the stage. I think it's really important. We're going to get into some questions that start at the top of an organization and then come down to the individual layer. Of course, put questions in the chat box, and then we will still have time at the end, hopefully. I'm really bad at time management on these, so if you think of a question, throw it in the box so we make sure we get to it. Okay. What are some specific things workplaces can do from the top level to foster belonging? And then on the other hand, are there things that workplaces just need to stop doing? Trish, you want to start that one off?
Yes, how they can foster belonging in the workspace. I mean, I think, one of the things is to acknowledge it and to not try to pretend like there's nobody that has any differences, and to let people, come to work as they are and come as their full selves, and to encourage that. And, I think that you get to some workplaces and they're just very homogenous, and you don't feel like that you can be yourself. And I think that, leadership that can, share with people how important it is to be yourself and what a benefit it is to the organization, when you have that diversity. I just think that that's one of the most important things that can be done.
Trish, can you add on? Erin had a question. Do you have examples of spaces or organizations where you have felt fully accepted, included, and seen, sort of as the foil to your Vermont stories?
Well, actually, one of them was coming to Rise for the first time, because I didn't know anything about Rise, and I got an email about it from, I don't know, some other organization I'm affiliated with in Denver, I guess. And when I learned about the front desk DOFI position, and so I reached out to Sarah and to Stacy and said, I'm interested in helping part-time at the front desk in, trade for my membership. And so I came in the first day and had an interview with Alyssa, right? Yeah. And, we had a great talk, and, we talked about my background and, what my small business does and, what my goals were. And, by the end of the conversation, she's like, okay, that's really cool. Yeah. When do you want to start? And it wasn't like it wasn't like I was applying for an executive position. So it wasn't like 4 rounds of interviews and 20 people that I had to meet with, but she just didn't bat an eye my wheelchair just never even came into the equation ever. I didn't feel like she was staring at it. I didn't feel like she was worried that I couldn't do the job. I didn't feel like she was judging me in any way, shape, or form. And it was really I left there and I was like, that was really weird. She didn't ask me anything about can I carry the coffee pot from the sink over to the table where the coffee goes? And and it was just it was just refreshing that it wasn't an issue. She didn't, she wasn't like, well, how is this person going to do this job? How is Trish going to carry the coffee? Instead of trusting that Trish knows how to problem solve, and she is a grown up, and if there's something that she's afraid she can't do, then she will tell you, hey, I might need an accommodation to help me carry the coffee. But not trusting an adult who's coming in and applying for a job and who on their resume has all the skills that you're looking for, but not trusting that they know themselves and that they know what they can do is really frustrating. So, I think that, that trust has to be there, and that knowledge that someone is going to problem solve, for themselves.
Thank you for sharing that. That makes me really happy to hear.
Yeah, it was really very nice, actually.
Meredith, you're up.
Okay. Things that businesses can do from the top down. I would like to share a little bit about, I worked with Ernst & Young for about 3 years. I worked for them for 2 years in their New York office in Times Square, and then for a year in their Denver office. And I had such a great experience in terms of their diversity and inclusiveness efforts, and had such a big educational arc there, I think, in getting involved. And I think no company does this perfectly. It's a spectrum, and it is a journey that every business sort of has to continue to work on. But some things that EY did that I have not experienced in other workplaces that felt really effective to me were that they had a really clear statement from the top down, and it was explicit, and it was touted widely, and it was available for everyone. And it was along the lines of, we value diversity. We know why it's important. We know it makes strong teams. We want you here. We want to celebrate everybody's differences. And that's how we do our business. And that's really important. A lot of companies don't have any kind of statement like that. But then there's also a lot of companies who will have a statement like that and then not do anything else. And it doesn't mean anything. Other things that EY did to incorporate that into the fabric of their community was that they, it was many, many things. They had affinity groups or professional networking groups. Sometimes they're called enterprise resource groups at various businesses. And for small companies, this is hard to do because you might not have enough employees, but at a huge global company like EY, they set up professional networks, and there was a professional women's network, and a Black professional network, and a veterans network, and a disability network, and a working moms network. And they gave those groups a budget, and those groups wrote their own mission statements, and the groups had a voice within the company, and those groups would host events and share their voice and share their experiences and educate their colleagues. And it was valued. If you talked about your participation in these groups, it reflected well on your yearly performance review, and it impacted how much you got paid. And within that structure, they fostered a community of mentoring too. I feel like recognizing sometimes someone comes into a workplace and if someone isn't totally feeling a sense of belonging, one way that we can help foster our employees is to set up mentor relationships. EY did this really well in the sense that they would train people on how to be a mentor and train people on how to be a mentee, and then create programs that would give some structure around it and reward people for participating in those programs. What else did I want to make sure I talked about? I think the workplaces I've been in also, where companies actually seek feedback about how it's going and how people feel included or not included, or how much to a degree people feel like they belong, is also important. The companies where I've been able to give feedback and that the feedback can be anonymous has been much more meaningful. And then those companies have then tended to respond to what the feedback they're getting. I don't think there's one set, like, do this one thing or do this list of 5 things and you will immediately have a magical unicorn rainbow workforce where everyone feels like they belong. It's an ongoing process of adapting and listening and self-reflection. And so getting feedback is a really important part of that.
And if I could just add to that, is that, diversity and inclusion is such a big topic. And I think that's what trips people up a lot, because, they don't know where to start. I mean, if you just even talk about disability, it's a huge range of disabilities and accommodations and things that make people feel like they belong. But then you add to that race and gender and, all of these other areas of diversity, it can be overwhelming. And I think that's, a lot of times the root of the problem. So it's just talking to people and understanding that, we're all individuals and we don't all, fit into one little mold. And it's allowing people to be independent and who they are, and to recognize that, and to, like Meredith said, to celebrate it. Like, you're different, your thoughts are different, your ideas are different, and we need that, at this organization, if we're going to be on the cutting edge. Because, if we all had the same idea, we're not going to move forward. And so I just think, I guess, embracing the fact that it's not a, one-time program that you have, we're going to have a diversity program and then that's it. It's not like that at all. And when you do that, it makes people, feel like it just doesn't, like they don't matter. If it's like, oh yeah, just one and done and, whatever. So I just think that's an important thing to do.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah,
Meredith?
I agree. No, I just had one more point. I think
Please.
Another thing I've really noticed that makes a difference in my experience has been that, all of those other things we talked about, but then also the leadership, whoever's in leadership positions in that company has to buy into it, and they have to set an example. I've been places where they sort of check all the boxes with these great policies and programs, and then the leaders sort of roll their eyes at it and just blow it off, and it undermines it. And I've also been in places where the leaders set an example in the words that they use and the way that they operate in the space and the way they interact with their employees, and it comes through. It makes a really big difference. And something that one of the programs earlier this month, I think it was Nikki Roach maybe, was talking about how to foster belonging, and she talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And it's such an important point. Like, first you have to have, fire, water, food, shelter, and then after that comes safety. And if people don't feel safe in a space, you're never going to get to the next place of belonging and like really kind of like unfurling their wings and feeling like they have ownership in that space. So I think also part of it is communicating through all levels of the organization, through example and through policies, that this is going to be a safe space. We respect people here. We choose our words accordingly to reflect that respect, and it's going to be a safe space for our workers.
Nice. Meredith, I'm going to have you answer this next one as well, to continue onto your answer, because I think it's related. So let's say I'm an individual at an organization or a member as part of a group, and the organization either doesn't address diversity and inclusion at all, or maybe some of the examples that you and Trish gave where like there's some value statements, but there's really no follow through. It's that drop in the bucket professional development that happens once a year. How, as a member or an employee of that organization, what are some ways that I can begin the inclusion conversation?
This is such a good question. And I feel like this is something I'm thinking about a lot right now too, because I feel like my company's space where I work now is similar to what you just described. I don't know if I really have a great answer. I'm still trying to figure it out. The ideas that I've been brainstorming with myself in my own head is starting conversations with people who have influence. That feels like a more powerful first step than like trying to go straight to the CEO. And I think asking questions or, sort of pointing out what you just said, hey, we don't have any, I've been thinking a lot about diversity and inclusion, and what kind of plans or policies do we have, or are we going to have to make that a part of our workspace? I don't know. I'm still in the process of trying to figure out this conversation myself. I think I have been focusing more on the individual one-on-one interactions of when people say something that doesn't sit right with me, speaking up and explaining why it's a problem. But I haven't moved forward a whole lot in trying to create really meaningful system-wide change in an organization. Mm-hmm. So it's a good question. I'm interested to hear what Tricia has to say and her thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, it's been so long since I've actually, really worked inside of an organization for a period of time. But, for me, like, I always feel like, if I want to see a change, like, I just need to start it. And how that looked, in my position as a solopreneur or whatever, was starting the Denver Disabilities Network, which, I just decided, okay, I'm going to put together this lunch and invite a bunch of people who might have an interest in disabilities, and let's have a conversation and see, if we can get numbers, we can get people who are interested in, the diversity of it and people who have influence within the community. And we'll go out and take that idea and spread it and hopefully grow it over time. And that's something that I hope to continue to do, because I think that there are a lot of people who are interested in diversity. I mean, our communities are only getting more diverse, and so I think that there are a lot of people who are willing to listen, and but it's when you act and you get absolutely no response that people stop trying to act. So you really do need to have some of those people, those decision makers, and people at the top who are willing to buy into it. And that might just be starting with organizations where that is part of the culture, and trying to spread that to the organization that you're in, and share best practices, and share ideas, and how and what the benefits are, because usually people who are looking for what's in it for them. So if you can answer that question and take that answer to them, then I think you're more likely to be able to make a difference when it comes to creating a more diverse environment.
Thanks, Trish. I think it's important that you both recognize that people at the individual level are not always in a position to set policy or make organization-wide decisions, but there is still an impact you can have at the individual level, and sometimes that's where it needs to start. So Trish, are there other things you do in your daily life or in your teams to help build an atmosphere of belonging?
To help build an atmosphere of what?
Belonging.
Of belonging? I don't know. I don't really work in a team. I'm a team of one. But yeah, I mean, again, just asking people, what their needs are, how they feel like they could fit in better. Asking people if they feel valued and if they feel like an essential part of the organization. If not, what can we do to change that? And, it really has to be a fact-finding mission, and you can't just, I don't think for any particular company or organization, you can't just create a diversity strategy without gathering that information from people, because you might create a strategy that's fine and well for some different areas of diversity, but you've missed a complete area like disability or something. I mean, a lot of times I find that with disability programs, they mention every element of diversity except for a disability. And so it's like asking your employees or your stakeholders or whoever you're trying to work with, what does it take to make you feel valued and make you feel like you belong?
Mm-hmm. Meredith, what are some things that you do in your daily life to help build an atmosphere of belonging? And I'll add one other piece. We did hear that personal story from Trish about how Alyssa made her feel like she belonged. Are there things that other individuals have done to make you feel a sense of belonging? So both sides of that.
Okay. I think that I have recognized that sometimes the workspaces I'm in don't necessarily feel like safe spaces for all communities. And while I haven't been able to change that from the top up like we talked about, or from the top down, I have really committed to myself that I'm going to create a sphere of safety around me, and I'm going to take that with me, and the people that I work with and that are in that sphere, I'm going to make that a safe space. And in thinking about this and sort of preparing for this panel, it's the first time I've ever actually sort of listed out what are the ways I actually do that. And I think I've got 3 kind of heavy hitters of how I do that. The first one is speaking up. When people around me in the workplace tell jokes that are inappropriate or derogatory, or make fun of an entire group of people, or use a word that's derogatory, or make an inappropriate comment, or even if they say something and it makes me uncomfortable in the pit of my stomach and I maybe don't always know right away why, but it just doesn't sit right, I speak up and I say something, and it's often a kind of awkward conversation, and I don't always have the perfect words in the moment, but I make a point to speak up. And I'll say more about that later maybe, but I do feel like that's a big one. I won't just laugh and sort of go along with it. The second thing, I feel a really big responsibility to continue to educate myself. I think the things that resonate the most for me in terms of understanding other people's lived experiences that might be different than the experiences I'm having is personal stories. Like for me, that really helps me learn, I think. So I seek out, whatever it is, if it's blog posts or films or books or, stories people are telling about their lived personal experience that's different than mine. I feel like it's important to always find reminders so that I'm not always making assumptions that other people are having the same experience I am. And I think the other really big thing I try to do is, I've had a number of situations in workplaces where something has happened to me that felt not okay, or someone said something to me that felt not okay, and I tried to tell someone about it, and the response was, oh, you're just imagining that, or oh, that didn't really happen, or oh, you're making a big deal of it, or I'm sure they didn't mean that. And all of those things invalidate that experience, whatever it was. And I really, really make a concerted effort when people come to me with experiences they've had in the workplace that were not okay, that I sit down and I want to hear about it, and I ask them about it, and I listen, and I don't always have an answer, and I don't think it's my role necessarily to have an answer, but I will see them and hear them and say, I am so sorry this happened, and I believe you, and I see you, and how can I be of support to you? And I think that goes a really long way towards trying to help create safety. One other thing I wanted to throw in there too, in terms of somewhere along the line in this, I came across a book that the organization PFLAG published. PFLAG is a nonprofit organization that advocates for the LGBTQ plus community. And they have a really, really great book. It's about 50 pages, how to be a straight ally to the LGBTQ community. And it's super informative and educational, and something I've learned a lot from. And it lays out the steps of being an ally in a way that's super clear and direct, and that I have found applicable to being an ally to any and all communities. And I have it downloaded, and I'm hoping to, it's part of the resources that I'd like to share with the group afterwards. But I really recommend taking a look at this book, because it offers some really good suggestions on how do you talk to someone who just told a really inappropriate joke, and how do you engage in that conversation, and tips to help keep it factual and communicate what you need to without getting derailed. So I'll share that later, but I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll make sure that you all get Meredith's list of resources. And this sort of brings us to what Aaron was commenting on in the chat box. Monica Black Robinson led a session a couple weeks ago on microaggressions. And one of the ways people can create an inhospitable place or barriers to belonging is through comments, jokes, word choice, certain phrases. What are some ways that you have responded to inhospitable words when they arise? And then, of course, alternatively, word choice that helps create a safe environment and a sense of belonging. Trish, you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I have to say sometimes, you know, I figure you have to kind of choose your battles. And sometimes I really want to stand up and fight. And then there are other times where I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't. So, but, you know, I do think it's important to be able to, you know, point out when somebody has said something that is offensive or that is wrong. But I also, you have to realize that everybody, you know, people see it differently. You know, what I find offensive, somebody else isn't going to find offensive. And that also makes it tricky. But I think that when you set your boundaries and you tell somebody, you know, please don't refer to me in that way, or, you know, please don't do this or do that. You know, I think it's like anything, you know, you need to set your boundaries with people. You need to tell them what is acceptable and not acceptable, and be willing to stand your ground. And, you know, it's not always easy, because you don't want to, you know, sometimes it's a really nice person that has said something really dumb, and you don't want to like jump down their throat, but at the same time, you know, you're like, that really wasn't very cool. So, you know, but it's unfortunate when it's up to you to like have to be the teacher when you didn't ask to be the teacher. You know, like, it's like I go through my daily life. I didn't ask to have to tell people about disabilities, and I always call myself the accidental advocate, because I never wanted to have to do this. But, you know, sometimes people need the education, and they need to be told, you know, what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, or at least what you know, for you is inappropriate or inappropriate. So speaking up is the thing that you have to be willing to do that if you want to see a change.
Yeah, I think that's a really important comment, Trish, that it is not anyone's responsibility to educate us on what's appropriate and what's not. If someone is willing to speak up and share their thoughts and personal experiences, like you mentioned, that's a gift. But like Meredith said, we also have to own our own learning. And I think that's a commitment we all have to make. So I appreciate that. Meredith, do you want to add? Oh, go ahead, Trish.
I was just going to say one more thing, is that I think that, you know, especially in my experience, because I have a visible disability, a lot of times people will treat me differently than they would anybody else. And, you know, what I would say is, you know, think about what you're saying, and would you say that to somebody else? Mm-hmm. You know, would you go up to somebody, and this has happened to me in the airport. I went to go through the TSA line, and I handed the woman my ticket and my ID, and she's like, how do you go to the bathroom? You know, and I was like, is that something you would say to the next guy in line? Because if you wouldn't say it to him, it's probably not appropriate. So, you know, that's kind of a little litmus test that you can use, is like, would I say this to just anybody, or am I just asking this one person and singling them out and asking them this question that is probably none of my business, and or I'm saying something that is probably not appropriate.
Yes, that's a great technique and reframe for people to think about before they speak, for sure. Meredith, what do you have to add?
Yeah, no, I agree with Tricia in terms of choosing your battles. I definitely, well, I'm currently working with a particular coworker who can't seem to not tell inappropriate jokes. And in some ways it has been helpful for me, because it has helped me practice disagreeing with him. But things that I hear a lot, or hear frequently enough that it's coming in front of mind when I think about this. Like if someone tells a joke, or even is just talking and uses the word retarded. Retarded is a derogatory term, and it's not okay, and it's outdated, and it's not okay. And when someone uses it around me, I will say, use a different word. You can't use retarded. It's derogatory, and it's used to denigrate an entire group of people, and it's not okay. And then usually we move on. Like, I don't want to be the word police. And most people, when I say that, will sort of be like, oh, oops, okay, and we move on. I recently had someone who argued with me, and we had an argument about why he thought it was a perfectly fine word to use. And, you know, I did the best I could with it, and but that's one that happens. I've also had coworkers recently who I've heard use the word gay to refer to something being stupid or something that they don't like. And it's also, I will also I usually will say something along the lines of, it's not okay to use the word gay in that context. Gay can refer to something that's joyful or happy, or it can refer to someone's sexual orientation, but it doesn't mean something that's stupid. Choose a different word. And I will also do it when someone, I feel like often people tell a joke where the whole point is that because women are only good for sex, or because the woman was so stupid, or because like the whole point of the joke is something that's really derogatory towards women in general. And I also, and sometimes I fumble through my words and I am not perfect at this, but I will call them out on that also. And I find, and what am I trying to say? I'm losing my train of thought a little bit. Those are not always easy conversations, and I often get butterflies in the pit of my stomach when I do it, and my face gets kind of flushed, and sometimes I stumble over my words. But I do believe it makes a difference. And I have been someone in the room when someone else stood up for a joke that was at my expense, and when someone else said something about it, it made a difference, and it helped me. And that kind of speaks to your other question of like, when, you know, when have you been at the receiving end of something that helps you feel more belonging?
Mm-hmm.
When someone else has stood up for me, it is such a relief, because it's exhausting to always be the person that's having to stand up for yourself. Well, this is sort of off topic, but so my head shakes, I have a tremor, and sometimes it's bigger in times and sometimes it's smaller. And when I'm out and about in public, people comment on it quite regularly. And there have been times when it doesn't feel safe. There was a time on the 16th Street Mall bus when a man came and sat next to me, and he was drunk. I could smell the alcohol in his breath, and he was in my space, and he was like, can you just stop shaking? You're making me really uncomfortable. Just stop it. And it felt really uncomfortable, and I knew he was drunk too, which is also a little bit scary, but it also sucked because it was in front of an audience. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the 16th Street Mall bus, those seats all face the center. So everybody's sort of facing everybody else. So this entire bus is witnessing this event of this man kind of harassing me and talking inappropriately and being in my space and basically telling me, stop, you know, you make me uncomfortable because your body shakes. And I was like, look, my body shakes and there's nothing I can do about it. I sort of lost it a little bit. And I said, if that makes you uncomfortable, you are welcome to go sit somewhere else. But frankly, it's none of your business. And it's not my job to make you feel comfortable around my body. And then he did a thing where he was like, whoa, easy, tiger. Not that big of a deal. Calm down. And the entire rest of the bus sat there and stared at us, and nobody said a word. So the interaction with him was really awful, but then the fact that it happened in front of an audience and nobody else spoke up sort of doubly impacted that. And I was really proud of myself that I stood up for myself, but then I got off the bus like 3 stops early. I didn't want to be in the space. I was embarrassed, I was angry, and I was frustrated, and I didn't feel safe. So that's sort of the opposite of your question, but my point is that when people do stand up and when they have stood up for me and said something, even if it's not about physical intimidation, but just about a comment or a joke, it makes a difference to me, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for sharing that personal story, Meredith. I'm sure it's not fun to talk about all the time, but it's a great learning experience for the rest of us too. Clarifying question from Ashley for you, Meredith, and then another one for you, Trish, that we'll go back to. Ashley's wondering, how do you approach the conversation about cancel culture? I don't know that phrase. I don't know if you do, Meredith, or we can ask Ashley to add. For example, people say something inappropriate, but then there's a mob mentality in response and doesn't leave a lot of room for growth, and it causes defensiveness.
Yeah, and it's sort of this like public shaming kind of thing. Like, you're so terrible, I can't believe you used that word, you're canceled.
Got it.
Yeah, I think, and if I am not understanding that correctly, Ashley, please feel free to say something. Yeah, I think, and this, I think to agree with what Tricia said earlier, I think this is a learning process, and nobody's going to always have the right words, and people are going to make mistakes. And I don't believe in public shaming or shaming people in general. That's not helpful for anyone. And while when I disagree with people, I sometimes get a little bit heated, I really try to keep it at a friendly, conversational, we have an ongoing relationship kind of level, because it's true. Just being like, nope, you're done, I'm not ever going to talk to you again, or I'm going to publicly shame you and embarrass you in front of everybody, I don't think that's helpful either. I think we have to also give each other credit for the fact that we can all change and adjust and grow. And that we're all in the process of doing that too. I think a notion of shaming people about it also sends the message of, well, I do this perfectly, and I know how to do this, and I'm super evolved and magnificent, and you did this wrong. And that's not doing anyone any favors either, because it's reinforcing this notion of arriving someplace and not doing any more work. Like, it's an ongoing process. I feel like cancel culture happens a lot on social media, and I'm not super involved with social media, so but I do think it happens in face-to-face relationships too. I don't know if that answered the question.
She said exactly.
Okay.
Thank you. Trish, back to your litmus test around like this internal processing. Would I ask this of somebody just in the general population? Someone's wondering, do you have advice for when you take that too far and maybe don't ask someone something to avoid it looking slanted, but you would actually ask the general anyone?
Is there an example of what?
It was me. It's Shelby. Can you hear me?
Oh, hey, Shelby.
Sorry, I'm using Jared. I had come from a meeting, so I have like his account on here, so it's not showing up as me. So my apologies. Yeah, I just specifically I'm here at my parents' house actually, and my sister and her African-American boyfriend are here, and we're obviously white. And so I like find myself not asking him things because I don't want it to look like I'm asking him because he's Black. Like, for instance, we were doing a puzzle and I literally didn't know a bunch of different puzzles. And I asked like one, I was like, I don't know this one. I don't know this one. And like, we were all joking and it was like a very safe environment. But the one training day guy came up and I was like, I don't know this one. And Annie was like, did you just ask him that because he's Black? And I'm like, no, I just asked about a lot of different things, but just like that. And this is a very minute example of that. And we felt safe. I know, Marcus, we've talked about it, but I do find myself in situations like that in public where I would typically ask anyone around me this question, but because I'm being sensitive to someone, or I'm trying to be inclusive or not trying to be offensive almost too far all the time, that I maybe wouldn't ask someone and have it be the reverse of that. Does that make sense? I'm not explaining.
Yeah, I mean, the way I kind of understand your question is like, I mean, sometimes somebody might need to know something about my disability, like, you know, hey, can you get onto this train, or do you need some help, or, you know, something like that, where it's like, I'm asking you because I recognize that you might have a difference in, you know, ability or opinion or experience or whatever, and so I'm asking you that, and I think that's okay. I think where it draws the line is when it becomes something that's just you know, private or offensive, or, you know what I mean, like for somebody to say, can I help you you know, carry your bags, that's fine. They're wondering, you know, I see that you're in a wheelchair. Is it hard for you to carry your bags? Can I help you carry your bags? And they ask me, you know, a question like that, as opposed to asking me, how do I go to the bathroom? So, you know, I think that, you know, in any relationship between any two people, like, it takes questioning and, you know, inquiring in to learn anything about somebody. I mean, anybody you talk to, it's a conversation that takes place over time, where you learn who they are and what's important to them and what they can do and what they can't do. And so, you know, sometimes it might seem like asking those questions are, you know, it might seem a little bit fishy, but you, I think you have to use your best judgment in that. And then also, I think you can just admit, you know, like, I don't know if this is something that you might know, or if this is something that you could help me with, but I'm curious if you could, if you know the answer to this question, or
yeah, do you find like the tone or just the way people approach things?
Yes,
You kind of get,
exactly.
like,
And
the sincerity or the where someone's coming from, because I feel like that anytime I tiptoe, I just trying to be like, I'm just trying to learn,
exactly. And I think if you admit, I don't know, I don't know the answer to this question. Can you help me? And I think that people, like, I want to be asked. Like, I want people to ask me, questions on how, I navigate daily life. But I don't want to be, like, I want to share that information, but it is all in how, somebody asks you. Like, for instance, I was at the airport one day, and a guy came up to me and he was like, "What happened to you?" And, some guy out of the blue, I didn't know him. And why do I need to tell him my personal story? Yet I am a motivational speaker, and I get up in front of hundreds of people every time I speak and tell them my story. So it's really about, like, when I'm speaking, I'm able to educate people, and they're, open-minded and want to hear. Whereas the guy in the airport just wants to, like, basically hear your drama and your baggage and feels like he has a right to. So I think a lot of it is in how you ask the question. A lot of it is in how just kind of your personal affect, like whether you feel like, I get to know this about you or not, or something like that. And there are going to be innocent mistakes. There are going to be things that you ask. I mean, I'm not perfect. I've gone up to people and said some really dumb things, and then afterwards been like, "Ooh, that wasn't really very smart." So, I mean, we're not perfect, and I don't expect anybody to be perfect when they come up and talk to me and ask me a question. But at the same time, I don't want them to, like, I think there's some obviously just bad questions, and you can censor yourself a little bit when it comes to that. But then there are just sometimes just, I innocently, can you help me understand this?
Great questions from the audience today. Thank you, y'all. We're getting close to the end. So I'm going to throw out two different questions, and Trish and Meredith, you can choose which one you would like to answer based on if there's something burning you want to share. So the first one would be, what areas of inclusion are you particularly interested in right now? And then the second one is, how has COVID-19 changed or affected the disability community? And we have about 3 minutes left. So if you can do both, just talk really fast. Meredith, you want to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. And I think that my answer addresses both of those a little bit. Right now, I'm really trying to learn everything I can about how to make online content accessible. And the reason that I started trying to learn that was because of the COVID-19 situation, things that used to be available in other ways are now only available online. And it's an area I don't know a lot about, and I'm reading stuff and learning stuff, and but some things that I've learned that I will share that I've added to my resource list is that including image descriptions that describe what's in a picture help make that content accessible to people who might be using screen reading software. Similar to the alt text function. And if you don't know what alt text is, it's in my resource list. And captioning videos, having captioning for events is another way of making online content accessible. I found a really great website that helps assess if a website is accessible, and will then give you feedback on ways to improve it. That is also in my resource list. So I'll stop there because I want to give Tricia time, but those are the things I'm trying to learn about right now.
That's great, Meredith. And a shout out to our closed captioner, Tina. You're doing a great job. We appreciate you. Trish.
I think that the COVID situation has just opened our minds to possibilities. And I think that's something that a lot of times keeps people's minds closed when it comes to accessibility for individuals with disabilities, because we think, oh, it's so difficult. Oh, it's such a big change. We can't possibly do that. And, you saw how quickly everything, overnight basically changed to online, and we changed our educational system, and people started working from home, and we started doing all of these things that individuals with disabilities have been asking for years. and, you know, have been getting no's, like, no, you can't work from home. It doesn't work that way. Or, you know, no, you can't do this and that and the other. And so I think it just, you know, hopefully it makes people understand that we are adaptable beings. And when we have to adapt, we adapt. And when you're not adapting, you're probably resisting because you're, you know, I just don't want to put in the effort, or I'm too lazy, or I'm too tired, or I don't feel like doing that for you. And so I just think it's important to understand that not only is adapting something that we're very good at doing, but a lot of the adaptations that we have in society today came because of people with disabilities. Like, you know, the curb cut that you push your baby stroller up was actually created for an individual who's blind and using a cane or a wheelchair. And, you know, your texting feature on your phone that finishes words for you without having to do the whole text, that, you know, came about because of people with disabilities using, you know, captioning and things like that. And so I think it's, you know, it's shedding, hopefully going to shed some light on the importance that diverse individuals have with bringing these things to the forefront, and then also with how quickly we can all adapt when we need to.
That's great. Thank you both so much. I'll be forever grateful for you both for joining this panel. We ask a lot of our panel members, and we always learn a lot. So thank you so much. And thank you again to Tina and to our audience who asked such great questions along the way, because I obviously did poor time management and we didn't have a Q&A section. But I hope you put your questions in the chat box and we got to them. Have a great rest of your week, and we will see you again Friday for a workout if you're interested. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.